All right. I don't know if everybody can hear that, but welcome to another episode of Drunk Agile. Maybe we should start with introducing, our sound effects machine.
Yeah, Nisha says hello.
Yeah, yeah. It was a late night for her, as you can see. Late
Yeah,
night.
she got into the whiskey before we did.
Yeah. So welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Vicanti. With me, as always, is
Pratik Singh.
and Nisha, of course, there in the background. I'm sure we'll be hearing from her later. In case you can't tell, it's our Christmas special, our Drunk Agile Christmas special. So we actually have a lot to talk about. Before we get into that stuff, a couple of housekeeping items. First, a shout out to Ryan Ripley. I don't know if anybody knows who Ryan Ripley is, but he was of course complaining to me, saying that I stole his idea for getting together and drinking and talking about Agile, because he's the first one to ever come up with the idea of sitting around drinking and talking about Agile. But yes, I was on. If you don't know Ryan Ripley's podcast, Craft Brewed Agile, Todd Miller's on it too. Please go check that out.
We should do a confluence of.
Yeah, we should do dueling. Dueling. So this certainly wasn't inspired by that. So thank you, Ryan Smiles Ripley, for that. Secondly, a lot of the questions, or kind of our main question tonight, comes from a gentleman by the name of Paul Brown. We had a great exchange with him on Twitter. He had some questions after. Thank you for watching our episodes, Paul. So great exchanges with him on Twitter on some things. So before we get into that, though, of course, we have to talk about what we're drinking. So,
so I'm drinking my Christmas gift.
That's pretty. I have to say that's pretty good. That's a pretty good.
Dan brought over a Christmas gift, and it's barrel bourbon, single barrel. It's cask strength, 56.11. They were oddly precise on that. 56.11%, and it is pretty good. So could not pass up the opportunity.
How much faster do you get drunk with each significant digit? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, no, it's like talk about math, huh?
So as kind of a nod to Paul, I'm breaking a little bit with tradition. Paul said his drink of choice is a gin. I'm not much of a gin drinker, but this is by far and away my favorite gin in the world. Sorry, Paul, I can't get my hands on the stuff that you mentioned, but the London #1 has to be the London #1 gin. I don't know, but I don't see a percentage on here. 47%. Sorry, 47%. So if you're going to drink gin, I highly recommend this one for what I know about gin. So and I made a G&T, so my apologies. I'm not drinking it straight. But cheers, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the topic, and then I'm going to let Pratik do all the speaking. And I think we've got some. Do we have visual aids too?
Oh, yeah, we have visual aids. Yeah.
Okay, so while you bring that up while I talk.
Cool.
So Paul watched a couple of our episodes on Monte Carlo simulation. If you haven't seen those episodes, you can look for our channel. I would tell you what they are. I think they're episodes 2 and 3 and maybe 4. I don't know, whatever, but you'll see. And after watching them, Paul wanted to know our thoughts on throughput and what's the best way to, for lack of a better word, condition throughput to get the most accurate forecast. So specifically, Paul sent us a data set that at the daily level, at the daily throughput level, had a whole bunch of zeros, right? And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were more zeros than ones, or more zeros than not zeros, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
And the question was, well, if we're doing a Monte Carlo simulation at the daily level that's dominated by zeros, isn't that going to, arbitrarily or unnecessarily or whatever skew the actual results, right? And we can talk about why that may or may not be here in just a second, if that makes sense. So then his question was, well, if I've got a data set dominated by zeros, wouldn't it make more sense to maybe aggregate it to a higher level, maybe at the weekly level, or potentially even the monthly level, or something like that? And maybe we do a Monte Carlo simulation just based on weeks. How many stories did I get done in this week? or how many stories did I get done in this month? And that be our input into the simulation. So Pratik went and did a whole bunch of work on this, right? You did, you're ready, right? You're not making a
Yeah,
lot.
I'm ready. I'm
Okay.
ready. I've been good.
So Pratik, take it away. Can you answer the question? I mean, when I have daily throughput that's mostly zeros, is it better to aggregate that data into some higher level of time unit?
Yeah, so we'll go to the example soon, but I do want to say there is no indication that it's better. There might be some theoretical indication that why it might be worse, but there's definitely no indication that it is better. And let's let the data do the talking.
Well, as long as we're going with spoiler alerts, spoiler alert for me is I personally think it's better, but I haven't seen the. Sorry, I think it's worse. I think it's worse. We'll have to edit that out. I think it's worse to aggregate the data. I think it's worse. I think by far it's worse to aggregate the data.
There's definitely, and then we'll look at the example. There is an instance in the example itself that shows us why it's worse. But
okay. So I just enabled screen sharing. If you want to share
perfect.
your screen,
Let's do that. Let's go to screen 2.
I still see you. Great, good job.
How about now?
Pratik's struggling with the whole computer thing. There it is.
Yeah,
I see. We see the spreadsheet.
Beautiful.
Take it away.
So this is throughput at the daily level, and this is what we were sent. And this, if you scroll down, you'll say it goes till cell number 71, which of course the first cell is just daily throughput. The labels are the 70 days of data. How many stories got done in each of the past 70 days? And as Dan said earlier, it is dominated by these zeros. You can see the number of zeros that are in this data.
Do you happen to know exactly how many zeros there are of all the?
I believe, and I'm trying to remember what we got in Twitter, but I think it was 49.
49 out of 70.
49 out of the 70 were zeros.
Okay, because that might be that's probably gonna be another question we're gonna ask is how many zeros before it's good or bad, right? But anyway, okay, but go on.
What I did was I took I just did this for the next 28 days. I chose 28 because the other format of data is in weeks, so we can compare 4 weeks to 28 days and find out how different they are. And the rest of the spreadsheet is just a Monte Carlo sim. It's randomly, each of these cells is randomly selecting from this data, and this bottom cell is just the totals for the next 28 days. If we randomly select from this data, total that selection for the next 28 days, how many stories do we expect to get done in the next 28 days? That's all we're trying to figure out here. After we do that, these are the results. 85% of the time we would expect to 17 or more stories, 70% of the time 24 or more stories, 50% of the time 31 or more, 20% of the time 45 or more. So those are the results we get when we do this. And I did this 1,000 times. So it's not a lot of simulations, but it's a decent number.
1,000 is probably good enough. For our purposes here anyway, it's probably good enough. Did you happen to build the histogram of the results by any chance?
I don't have the histogram.
Because that might be some people's nervousness. I mean, they might be thinking, hey, when you have a lot of zeros sampled like this, you're going to get a really, really, really wide results histogram.
Yeah, and maybe right after this we can build it and pull it in.
Yeah.
Edit and so edit histogram here.
Well, yeah, we'll do that in post. Yeah. Whatever that means.
If we ever do post.
Okay. Good. All right. So that's days.
Yeah. So this result set here, 85% of the time we'll get 17 or more, 70% of the time 24 or more, 50% of the time 31 or more, and 20% of the time 45 or more. So take a screenshot if you want. Those are the results of daily. In fact, maybe I can copy these and insert it into the other one. Same thing for weekly. Take the same data, sum it up by 7 days, do 7-day sums on it, and then run it for 4 weeks. So now this is weekly throughput. Each of the past 10 weeks, this is what we got done. So let's find out, just like we found out 28 days, how much can we get done in the next 4 weeks. And exact same method, do the same sampling, same summing up, and these are the results we get. 85% of the time, 15 or more, 70% of the time, 21 or more, 50% of the time, 32 or more, and 20% of the time, 45 or more. If you remember the results from the days forecast, those are very similar. It's like 17, 24, 31, 45. We have 15, 21, 32, 45. They're almost the same. I'm sure if we ran this out to like 10,000 simulations, they'll start to converge a lot more. But there's no, I mean, this doesn't give any indication of there's a huge breadth of results where they're completely different.
Can you put those side by side and zoom in a little bit? I don't know. This might be a little bit small for our people to see.
Oh, maybe I could do paste values with values in source formatting. So every time you change something in Excel, it reruns, but here are the results. And whoa.
Oh, that actually is great. That's perfect. So on the left is weeks, on the right is days, right?
Yeah. So this is weekly, and you'll see it changes every time I do this because of the number of simulations. But yeah, that's Excel magic for you.
Yeah. So at first glance, daily's saying that we can get more than weekly done. Do you this is a question. Do you think that's a reasonable conclusion or not, based on what you just said?
I don't necessarily think it's a reasonable conclusion, just because I only did 1,000 sims. I have my gut feel, and again, my gut feel is that if we did 5,000 or 10,000 sims of this, these two are going to start to converge.
I agree.
Because you can see how they were changing around even a little bit as I was typing things in.
So to address Paul's first question, believe it or not, sampling that whole bunch of zeros in the daily does not make it look like you can do less. It actually, at the very least, we can say that we can do roughly the same. So there's.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, good.
What I was going to say was, one thing that I would caution about this is the way we did this sim was pure random sampling. We were just randomly sampling from the data available. If you're doing any curve fitting stuff,
and you shouldn't. But if you are,
it is very likely that the zeros are going to skew that curve that you're using, and that might skew your results. It is possible that I think I did double check with Paul that he wasn't doing that when he was looking at this. But if you're doing that, I can see how your sampling curve might be very different and could totally skew your results.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about, if you can, because I've got some things to say about this. Let's talk a little bit about just this right now. It's not necessarily showing a slam dunk why it might be better or worse to aggregate your data. So I'd like to. I personally can't come up with any good reasons why it might be better to aggregate your data. Can you, based on this?
I don't know.
Before we get to the not good stuff. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't see what it gets you, right? I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, if you're doing weeks from weeks, or if you're doing months from months, or years from years, the general, that discrete distribution of that data should probably be the same. It'll probably end up being the same if you're using 30 days of data and then splitting up into 5 6-day segments, or 6 5-day segments, or weekly segments. The general results you'll get would probably be the same. I don't see what you would gain from if you are doing just base random sampling from the data. If you're not adding extra magic to it, I don't see how it would make a difference, make it better.
And that's always been my experience. I know there are a couple of people out there who advocate for whenever your data is dominated by zeros to aggregate your data, and I have never seen a benefit. Not saying that there isn't one. I just have never seen it. I think it makes things way more complicated than it needs to be, um, but it also introduces some potentially negative side effects. So let's talk about those. What are some potential problems with doing this?
Well, I'll start with the one that I immediately saw when I saw the data, and it kind of, at least in my eyes, it proves why you shouldn't do it. Is I'm going to zoom into just the throughput section of this, um, and this is the weekly throughput, and you can see week one had 5, then two had 22, three had 8, 4, 4, 8, and then there are weeks 7 and 8 which have 0 throughput. If you picture yourself at the end of week 6 and you're trying to predict how much I can get done in the next 2 weeks, there is no sampling of these first 6 values that will tell you that you're going to get 0 things done. Like there is absolutely no way you will get 0 for those 2 weeks, regardless of how conservative you want to, how high a confidence you want to show on that. On the other hand, if we were looking at this daily throughput, where we have a bunch of zeros in those first few weeks, and we were predicting out those next 2 weeks, there will be multiple simulations that will end up with 0. So if you had to do the forecast for those 2 weeks, there will be a good number of simulations, and the higher confidence level you go, the more of those will get included. To say with a very high confidence, you could say that we'll do 0 or more. There is no distribution here in the weeks distribution that will give you that.
And
That was the first thing that jumped out.
I don't think that can be overstated, because I think most teams, most managers, especially if they weren't very familiar with Monte Carlo and what they're doing, that's the exact conclusion they would draw by looking at that first 6 weeks of data. Is, you know, there's no way. There's 0% chance of us going the next 2 weeks getting nothing done. 0% chance. That's never happened. In fact, we've never gotten less than 4 things done. So
Yeah.
at the very least, for the next 2 weeks, we should be planning on 8 things, right? I don't think that can be overstated enough, because that's the people. I don't think people will understand the nuance of that. Of course, more experienced would understand there's no such thing as 100% certainty when it comes to these things. But yeah, I've got 2 things that I wanted to mention about this as well. I don't know. Did you have anything else?
No, that was
Because
that
I
was the
think
biggest thing for me.
because I think
Yeah.
yours is the biggest one. I've got a minor point and a slightly bigger than minor point. The first, I think, and this is a fairly minor point, but I think it does bear mentioning. When you start aggregating to weeks, go from daily to weekly, um, now you have to make essentially an arbitrary decision around how you draw the boundaries of that week. Is it
Mhm.
Monday to Sunday? Is it Sunday to Saturday? Is it something else? And potentially how you draw those boundaries will affect how these throughput numbers come out. And it may make things come out a little funky. Again, this is a very minor point. I don't think that's fatal at all. But potentially, if you were to say do weeks Sunday to Saturday versus Monday to Sunday, you could potentially get drastically different results. And so that's a minor point that I think bears considering when you go to aggregate your data. How are you drawing those weekly boundaries? Pratik just muted because he's cussing under his breath, because he doesn't agree with anything I'm saying. The second, that's a little bit more than minor, that I think is maybe an intermediate concern. It certainly would be an intermediate concern for me, is the second that you aggregate to weeks and you want to start doing a forecast, then the finest level granularity that you can get is weeks. And so what I mean by that, if we're projecting out in, like this, we could say, like, say we had 1,000 stories to do, the best that we could say in the results of the Monte Carlo simulation is, oh, this will take 10 weeks. This will take
Mhm.
11 weeks. It'll be at the granularity of weeks, which again, in some contexts may not be that big of a deal. But if you're trying to get work done by a specific time period, by a specific day, say you've got a conference coming up, say you've got a release coming up that's happening on a specific day, say you've got a holiday coming up like Christmas that is happening on a specific day, the best that you could ever say is, well, there's an 85% chance it gets done sometime that week. We don't know what our risk is for it to get done by that specific day. Again, in a lot of contexts, that may or may not be all that big of a deal, but it's something else to keep in mind, that you're limited, your output granularity is going to be limited by your input granularity. For me, that alone is the reason why I would very, very, very strenuously argue against aggregating your data when you don't need to. And I think we've just proved, certainly with this data set, that there is no need to.
Yeah, there's also, just to add to that granularity point, um, we haven't explored this enough, and we probably need to at some point. But towards the end of a release, or a dead to nearing a deadline, um, teams start violating the main assumptions under Little's law. They start going from a whip of X to a whip of zero. Get all this done and close it out. Um, at that point, Monte Carlo starts behaving funky because we are kind of trying to accelerate our throughput to get to zero. The fewer number of whatever if you have a larger granularity, and if you have projecting out only two, whatever you want to call them, units out, um, in days that problem happens with 2 days out. In weeks that problem happens with 2 weeks out. So it's just another point on how the higher granularity can hurt you, especially towards the end of a release, a cycle, whatever you want to call it, when these forecasts might matter even more than they did earlier on.
So I mean, so that's, I don't know. I think we've kind of beat this one up as much as we can. I don't know. Is there anything you want to sum up on this topic before we
No,
move on? I don't even know if we have time for the next one, but go ahead. Yeah.
um, no, that was it. I mean, I think again, you can feel free to do it both ways, but if you're doing random sampling, if you're not doing any funky extra math distribution curve stuff behind it, they should give you similar results. It's just daily will probably give you that, as you said, a lower granularity of things, which hopefully would work out better, which
Right.
usually does.
And that's what I would sum up is, you know, I also believe for the vast majority of data sets, daily and weekly will give you very, very, very similar results, regardless of the number of zeros that you have. That being the case, the aggregating, adds in, complexity and concerns and additional assumptions and all these things. Is just, I just think it adds more things to worry about than you need to, and it's not giving you, I would argue, a better answer. So why would you even bother? If it's not giving you a better answer and it's potentially going to give you a worse answer, that's all the argument I need for not to do it. In my mind anyway, in my world. So what's the next one we should talk about? What the next one is? I don't know, because we've been babbling for.
Yeah. So the next question we got was, in the last episode we did our implementation of feature Monte Carlo, where we were running Monte Carlo with story throughput, with a lower level throughput, but layering feature whip on top of it to distribute that throughput out to how many features we had in progress. There was actually a very interesting question that came through on one of the Slack channels about um, why not just do Monte Carlo with feature throughput? Why not just do that? And that should give us similar results. I mean, if we can do it with story throughput, we can do it with feature throughput. Why not just do that, as opposed to doing this thing where you do Monte Carlo using story throughput and then overlay feature whip on it?
I have a feeling that our arguments and our conclusions are going to be very, very similar, Pratik. Are they to what we just talked about?
It's, It's interesting how these two kind of both these questions are different but almost the same on why not aggregate it up and do it at the higher level. And for me, one one just to take that same vein as what we were talking about, one issue is that of granularity. um, and 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 again, when you run Monte Carlo just purely based on throughput, what you're really saying is I can get X number of things done by date Y, or it will take I I am highly confident that by in order to do X number of things, I need this many days. I mean, it's either when will X number of things get done, or how many things can I get done by Y date. And that's the best we can do when it comes to feature throughput, and using that to say, by in this quarter I can deliver 10 features. Uh, we don't necessarily at that point, what we're really saying is, here are the 10 features, or 10 features are going to get out there. We don't really know on a regular basis what is the probability of each of those features getting done. um, and without taking feature whip into account, where the best we can do is assign those probabilities top down to say, priority number one will have X percentage probability, priority number two will have Y, and it'll decrease as we go down. That's the traditional way of doing it, and it will work. It'll absolutely work. And but what doesn't, the two other things that happen. The only time you'll be able to really update those probabilities is when either the date moves or one of the features gets done. Only then do other features probabilities get updated. Meanwhile, a lot of stuff is happening under the hood with these features. A lot of stories are getting done. People are making progress on things. Those are not getting taken into that. All that progress and all the chipping away of the stories under these features is not getting taken into account till a feature is actually done. That's why we prefer to do the same thing, where you're taking that daily throughput at the story level and using that to figure out what is the updated probability of for a feature.
For me, the corollary to that, and this is a very, very subtle point, so I'm going to make it, and you'll just have to make it better for me. You'll jump in and say, yeah, Dan, that sounded stupid. This is really what you're trying to say, which is fair. The corollary to that is when you're looking just at feature numbers and feature throughput, there's not much consideration. I would say the default behavior would be to not give any consideration to the size of those features. Now, generally speaking, we don't care about sizing, of things. We don't care that all our stories are the same size. We don't care about that all of our features are the same size. We don't care about any of that, generally speaking. But especially when it comes to features, and this is what Pratik was just talking about. Under the hood, when you're working on a feature, you're finishing a whole bunch of stories. You're finishing a whole bunch of stories. At some point, the functionality that is delivered within that feature might be good enough, and we might be able to say, hey, you know what? This thing is good. Let's ship it. If you're looking at it from a story perspective, from how many stories we're getting done, that cutoff point, if you will, I think becomes much, much more apparent. If all you're doing is looking at feature numbers, you're like, well, it's a feature and it can be as big as it wants and whatever, which is true. It can be. This is segueing into probably next week's talk. It's not going to be now. It's not going to be tonight, unfortunately. Where we're going to talk about right sizing of things. And we're going to talk about right sizing at the story level. We're going to talk about right sizing at the feature level. But one of the biggest tips and tricks that you can do in order to make your Monte Carlo forecasting as accurate as possible is to practice right sizing. And right sizing at the feature level will almost certainly come down to how many stories are in that feature. There are other ways to right size features. There's no doubt. But you would be able to see, if you're looking at stories, you'll be able to see sooner that, hey, this feature is getting too big. We might need to break it up. So I guess that's my biggest problem. By focusing on stories, we can start talking about, okay, how big is this feature, and is it really, really too big to be in our forecast? So now make that point better than I did, Pratik, without talking about right sizing, because that's next week.
Yeah. It's if you have, okay, I won't use the word right sizing, but I'll use the word age. If you have a very long running, multiple very long running features. Let's say these features run in the order of 6 to 8 months. And you're talking about, hey, what are we going to get done in the next 3 months? It might say 10 features, but you'll have absolutely no idea which 10 features those are going to be, because your features run 6 to 8 months. It's most likely the features you started 6 months ago, if you're actually watching their age and making sure that they will get done. That's the extreme example. Now, your features hopefully don't run 6 to 8 months. We've definitely seen it happen. But Dan was going to mention a couple of teams, but he didn't. But even if your features are run shorter than that, forecasting out for say 3 months and features are running in the order of 1 to 2 months, if you're not watching the age of these features, and if you're not watching how many features you have in progress at any given time, those features that start towards the second half of that release are probably not going to get done. No amount of Monte Carlo is going to help you with that.
So I don't know, to kind of bring this back and to kind of sum up, to answer the question directly, there's absolutely, as you started, there's absolutely no reason why, if you're wanting to do Monte Carlo at the feature level, why you can't just do feature level throughput. Take feature level throughput, throw it into Monte Carlo simulation, and run it. There's no reason why you can't do that. And like I said, as Pratik said, in some contexts, that might be very, very, very valid. The problem is we run into all the things that we just talked about. We have a limited data set. We have a much more limited data set if we do it that way, which means we need to go longer to potentially get enough data. We have problems, with the granularity that we talked about, and we run in. I think the biggest problem we run into is this of right sizing and not being able to get signals early enough that something may be wrong. So I don't know.
I think there's one other thing that I did want to mention, which was when in the last 2 episodes, assuming you're watching these in that order and we're publishing them in that order, when we talked about Monte Carlo and feature Monte Carlo, what we ended with, both of those, was this idea of continuous forecasting, as we do every half an hour, every day, every 4 hours. Usually there is not enough data available that regularly at the feature level to forecast over and over again. There is data available at the lower level which will help you do that as time progresses and as stories get done. So that's the only other point.
Well, so that's enough. I think that's enough Monte Carlo talk for Christmas. I just want to say thanks very much to the people who are watching the videos and submitting your questions. We welcome anybody, in the comments, or reach out to us on Twitter, or however you want to get a hold of us. Send us your questions, and when we get a good critical mass of questions like this, we're happy to dedicate episodes for these specific concerns that are out there. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. Anything to wrap it all up before we call it quits tonight, Pratik?
Yep, that was mostly it. I mean, thanks again for sending in questions, for watching, and being engaged enough to ask questions, for watching two drunk guys babble about Monte Carlo of all things, and then send questions.
So stay tuned for next week. Again, hopefully we are doing this in order, and hopefully we are going to get to this next week. The whole idea of right sizing and how right sizing may affect or may not affect your forecasts, well, it will. That's a topic that deserves an episode on its own. So that's probably what we'll be focusing on next time. So until then, thank you very much to Paul Brown for the questions. Thank you very much again to Ryan Smiles Ripley for the idea of getting around and drinking and talking about this stuff. For Nisha there in the background, and Nisha, for Pratik, I just want to say everybody hopefully has a safe and happy holiday season. Next week will probably be without the toques.
Yeah,
so we'll retire those for hopefully until
next at least.
Yeah, at least. Well, who knows? Maybe we will be drunk. So
in July.
Yeah, Christmas in July. Everybody, please be well, and we will see you in the next episode. Right.